At 20, I worked for free to finally land that dream job. At 25, I went and quit that dream job to follow my heart. At 35, I went and walked away from the career that most people spend their entire lives trying to build so that I could finally do what I've always wanted to do. Hey, I'm Viv. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to my journey of publishing my first novel of the Aristasis series, Call of Matter, which launches February 2027. So today's topic, we're going to talk a little bit about how I actually ended up here in the first place. I think I've mentioned little bits here and there in my previous videos and podcasts about, what kind of led to this point, but I wanted to really dedicate one video to talk about who I am, where I come from, and all the things that kind of led to this point. So we're going to start really at the beginning now. I'm Canadian, born and raised. My family is actually originally from Hong Kong, which is why actually my first language is Cantonese Chinese, not English. English is my dominant language. I dream in it, I think in it, I write in it, I do all things in English, but my first language is actually Cantonese Chinese, which is why, for whatever reason, numbers still come to me in Cantonese first rather than English. Of course, I know how to count and do math in English, but intuitively, I always do it in Chinese. So that's my background. So my first series, Aristasis, is very much inspired by my move to Europe. I think you can probably tell by the name Aristasis, the name of the series. But actually my second series, which is already in the works, is more inspired by the Asian part of my background. So I also have a third series planned. It's a fantasy series that's more inspired by my upbringing in Canada, my first 25 years in Canada. Anyways, that's a long-term trajectory. I'll talk about that in some future episodes. So family background from Hong Kong. As a kid, I was always a really creative kid. My favorite hobbies were arts and crafts. I loved reading as a child, loved writing as a child. I actually started with poetry more as a kid. But of course, now being an author on the precipice of launching my first novel, of course, I moved then to prose and to fiction. So I think what's important to talk about at this point, how should I say it? Like if you look at my LinkedIn, my CV, my resume, it's very like this typical dime a dozen corporate type A trajectory. So I went to business schools in Canada. I got early acceptance into every university I applied to. I was amongst top of my class. I was on the student council. I was co-editor of the school newspaper. I was co-chair of the Model United Nations Club. I was co-president of the mock debate club. So just typical classic overachiever. I think what's really important to talk about is that that was never actually the real me. So as a kid, like I said, I was super creative and I actually wasn't all that type A. Under the age of 10, I wasn't an A student. I preferred to spend all my time daydreaming, which is funnily enough now in my career, that's actually my full-time job. Not daydreaming, but I live inside my own head and I write about it, right? But that's actually who I really am on the inside. But somehow, somewhere around the age of 10, I think so many people can relate to this. So many immigrant children can relate to this. And it's funny because it's not actually from my parents. So actually, quick side tangent. I do a lot of side tangents. So quick side tangent. My parents are both middle children, actually. So they both have odd sets of siblings in terms of odd numbers. And they're both smack dab in the middle of many kids, actually. And both my parents are self-proclaimed type Bs. Not that there's anything wrong, they're both self-proclaimed not overachievers. My parents achieved success and they're very happy with where they've gotten. They immigrated from Hong Kong. Of course, they spoke English, but they had to start all over from scratch in their careers. And my parents didn't come from money. My dad actually grew up very, very poor. He grew up never having enough food on the table. And so I think if I think about how they started and where they ended up, there's loads to be proud of. But my parents self-proclaimed say, we were not ambitious, overachieving types like you and your sister are. They're talking about my sister and I, because my sister and I were both very much overachiever types, top of the class types. And it's interesting because my parents actually did not enforce that or put any pressure on us. That's like the most interesting part about this. I think a lot of people, hearing my story or maybe from their own stories are expecting they're going to be like, parents were like those types of parents and gave her a lot of pressure, do that stable career corporate. No, granted, they didn't want me to go in a profession where I was going to be a starving artist, which is why I obviously ended up where I ended up, because I had no safety net. Like if I wasn't gonna go fund my own lifestyle, I was gonna end up on the streets, right? Like my parents wouldn't let me start, but they can't be there forever. So it was really like, okay, I need to make it on my own, But in terms of being able to make it on your own, you don't need to be top of the class, A student, top business school, top everything, top recruitment. It's not really necessary, but for whatever reason, I put a lot of pressure on myself for things like that. And I think that comes a lot from the mentality of growing up feeling like I don't know if a lot of people can relate to this as an immigrant, but I always felt like, growing up in Canada, I think it's very different now. Growing up, when I grew up, I always just felt like I didn't really belong. It was really about, I need to work 2 or 3 times as hard as everyone else. I need to be 2 to 3 times better than everyone else so that I can finally belong and finally be good enough to belong here. So, and I don't know, I guess once you read Call of Matter and you really get to meet my protagonist, Tori Sable, maybe you'll see some patterns in that. I mean, Tori's not an immigrant like I am, but she does inherit the core beliefs from me. I think it really helps give depth to her character. I mean, Tori's very different from me, but that's kind of one part of myself that I wanted to give to Tori, because I'm someone who can really, I get it. That's literally something I can understand so deeply. That is something where I don't have to construct that. So I will actually do a separate video at a different point in time in terms of how my writing process actually is, how my characters actually come to me. I do zero construction. Maybe that just makes me very lazy. Sometimes I think I really am quite lazy, but my characters and my stories and my ideas, they broadcast to me. They fall into my head fully formed as they are. And the construct of the worlds and the people is very minor fine tuning that I usually do in the second and third draft. The initial idea and the first draft is all straight broadcast for me. So anyways, whatever, random side tangent. But yeah, so it wasn't actually my parents who got me to be this way. It's just somehow, I think, just when you grow up as an immigrant, whatever, various influences, different things, it shapes who you are. So that's who I ended up being. Extremely intense, high-strung, probably a bit of a pain to be around for a very long period of time. I'm much more chill now. But I'm in my 30s now, and I would say probably in my high school years and my uni years, I was probably quite honestly unbearable to be around. I mean, for me, the friends I've had for a very long time, oh my God, that is just such proof of unconditional love. That is ride or die. If I think about the person that I was, sometimes I'm like, oh God, I don't even want to be around that person, but these people have stuck around. That was a little bit like high school me, so I've given you a bit of that, but how I ended up in business school, how I ended up working for free. So let's get to a little bit of that. Okay, so I was in business school, and in my 3rd year of university, I went on a student exchange to Hong Kong, and I was 20 at the time, and if you'll believe it, it was my first time ever in Asia. Not even back to first time visiting the origin, the homeland of where my family background is actually originally from, but it was actually the first time I was in Asia, period. And I remember that being just such an incredible experience, because I arrived in Hong Kong and suddenly so much about me felt it explained so much about me. It explained all these parts of me that I never really understood, that I felt didn't fit, that I felt didn't belong where I actually lived, and it didn't fit in and belong because everybody else was different. Suddenly it made so much sense. I just showed up at Hong Kong and there were shops selling traditional Chinese medicine, which I know now in the year 2026 is cool again, right? People are like, ooh, like alternative medicine and like natural medicine and all that stuff. Like, I grew up with all that stuff, but I grew up when it wasn't cool. Like people are like, the smells, like this is weird. Like why are they, like it was just like nobody was using it. Nobody thought about it. Everyone thought it was like weird hocus pocus stuff. Like that's the environment I grew up in, and I always had to hide that. Like I had to hide all these parts of it. I had to hide, like, I don't know, I didn't grow up religious, but like a huge part of the culture of Hong Kong culture is Buddhism. No, I didn't grow up religious. My parents aren't super religious, but of course there are some customs that we observed. I was very much a part of Hong Kong culture, and I always felt like I needed to hide that. I needed to hide those parts of my culture. I needed to hide my second language, or my first language if you think about it. I needed to hide the food I grew up on, the medicine that I grew up on, and all this stuff. And I showed up in Hong Kong, and suddenly I was like, oh my God, I don't need to hide it. Everyone else is like that here. And I remember like the moment even I got on the plane, and I remember like on the speaker system, they'll say stuff in English, but then they said it in Cantonese. And I was like, oh my God, like it was just such an emotional moment. I got off the plane, and you know, I go to 7-Eleven, charge my octopus card, and everyone there is speaking Cantonese, and they're selling Vita soy, they're selling Chinese herbal medicine. And it was just like such an incredible experience to really, it was so weird because I've never been there, but I also had this weird feeling of like coming home, which of course, like flash forward a couple of months later, I ended up spending 8 months there, but flash forward, like at the end of the 8 months, I also realized I didn't really fully belong there either. Because of course I'm foreign born, I'm fluent in Cantonese, but I can't read or write it. I can't really work in it, right? Everything I know about it, I just learned from home, from speaking. So, and there's just other things, like there's some cultural differences, and I just also felt like, okay, I don't really belong there either. So other side tangent, but I'm a German citizen, which I got that very recently. Last September, I became a German citizen. Obviously, I'm a Canadian citizen. I also have immigration rights in Hong Kong, although I'm not a citizen. But I mean, on really good days, I'm like, I'm a global citizen. You know, I can make it anywhere. I can belong anywhere. But on bad days, I'm like, I don't belong anywhere. And I think anybody who's in a similar situation as me is going to feel so seen. Like I know people I talk to one-to-one who are in such a similar situation, foreign born, where they kind of feel at home in their homeland, they kind of feel at home where they were born, but now they live, like, and you just kind of feel like a bit transient. But anyways, I don't want to make that so negative. I mean, I had the most incredible experience when I was in Hong Kong. It was my first time really, I mean, I lived away from home when I was in university. It was also kind of like the first time I was like really, really away from home on my own, right? Where I went to university, I was still like a 3-hour drive from where I grew up, and Hong Kong was just like ocean separating. And it was just so immersive, right? So think about it. As for me, like A student, type A, I showed up on exchange and it was like pass fail. So like it didn't matter. I didn't need to get A's. I mean, somehow there was still this weird part of me that still kind of wanted to get A's, which like honestly now in hindsight, I'm like, Viv, come on. But I didn't take it very seriously. And it was just really, I mean, like where we lived was also like in like I went to school in like a typical university town where it was just like the university was the town, which was really fun because you're kind of incubated and you have that very quintessential uni experience that you watch in movies, with like the old limestone buildings, and it's like you're in your own little bubble and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, spending those 8 months in Hong Kong, especially spending 4 of those months not working, but studying, you're like in a city, and you're in a city like Hong Kong, where it's like, oh my God, Hong Kong's one of those places where you're gonna have a blast when you're a billionaire, but you can also have a blast when you're a student and have no money. And I just remember having like the greatest time while I was there. So what's interesting when we talk about, you know, really serendipity here, I made a very dramatic decision before I went on exchange. I was up to be co-chair of one of the very big consulting conferences at my business school, which I know sounds really weird, but when you're in business school, like making it into one of those clubs when you're a fresh, like when you're a first year, moving your way up and eventually being co-chair, like that's like a way to shoe in your recruitment. So business school in Canada, I think a lot of you, if you don't live in Europe, where university is very much subsidized, nearly free free actually in some cases. Or like if you have to pay, it's like maybe like 2,000 euros a year or something like this. Like I went to a business school where I racked up a big student debt. I think any other Americans listening to this can absolutely identify. So I went to one of those like elite business schools, and so I actually got in first year, which was a really big deal. They asked extracurricular, that was really important to add my resume. Because ultimately, like getting into one of these business schools, like the goal after that is to get recruited into one of those jobs, right? Where you start right out of the gate. You're not starting from the bottom. You're starting at like on a management fast track. You get the money. You get the fast track career. Like that's how you jumpstart your career. And there's only so many of those jobs, right? So I went to a business school where there were global applications, but they only accepted 300 people. And it was the type of program where if you fell below, I think, if you fell below a C, you were on probation for a year, and if you couldn't get your grades back up, you were out. So it wasn't even like you would fail out of the program. It was like you needed to be at least a C student or else you were out. It was also the type of business school where they would rank you from 1 to 300, and you could go into the office to find out where exactly you were within your year. Like, are you top? Are you bottom? Are you in the middle? You actually got to find out exactly how great or how horrible you are. So it was that type of very Shark Tank environment. I will talk about this a little bit more in a separate video about actually how my elite business school experience actually inspired the military college shows up in Call of Matter or as a part of Aristasis. Dynamics of the people, some of the characters, like so inspired by my elite business school experience. But that's like a totally separate topic. So anyways, so the goal was absolutely, I need to get recruited out of here. You have to remember, like, immigrant family, I don't come from money. I took out a big student loan. Like I just had this huge pressure where like, I need to pay that stuff. Like obviously I got a scholarship when I got in, a couple of scholarships, but it was like the majority of it was still like on my shoulders of something I needed to pay back. It was a big loan. I mean, not quite 6 figures, but well into the mid to high 5 figures. I was asked to become co-chair of this big consulting conference. And then I made this like crazy decision to turn it down. Even though actually the co-chairs of the previous year actually had to sit down with me and were like, babe, like, are you sure? Because this is yours. Like you've been working like 3 years for that, or you've been working like at that point, I guess like what, like I was in 3rd year. So like you've been working like 2.5 years for this. Like it's yours. Like you've proven yourself. Like this is yours. Like this is your chance. I think like every co-chair of any of those conferences got recruited into like big fancy jobs, big fancy salaries. And the reason why I turned it down is because I was going to show up, if I decided co-chair, I was going to show up a week late into my exchange, which meant I was going to miss that orientation week. I was going to miss the first week. And it was like the first time in my life where I just really decided to choose me. Like I decided to choose, like, this is what I want to do. It's not the strategic thing. It's not the practical thing. It's not the thing that I should do. And at that point I was 20 and I'd spent like 10 years at this point, like half of my lifetime only doing what I was supposed to do, like dominant strategy all the time. I actually had a friend that once asked me, she's like, this was in high school. I was 15, I think. And she actually sat me down and was like, Viv, like, when does that moment come where you actually start like living your life for you? Like, you remember we were 15. This girl was 15. And like, I actually just felt like that was such like I don't know, like that question kind of haunted me like years later. It didn't really mean anything to me in that moment, but years later she was just like, when are you actually going to start living your life for you rather than for the future? Like, when does the future actually arrive for you? So that, of course, now that I'm older, I realize that's the fallacy of like, I'll be happy when. But of course I let myself be that way. It's actually really sad. Like, she asked me at 15 and I would let that go on for another 15 years before I realized, oh, like that's what she meant. That's what she was talking about. But anyways, so at that point, I don't know. I spent my whole life only making those decisions. I spent like the 10 years only making those practical, strategic decisions. And at that point, at 20, I was just like, just let me have that orientation week. Let me have that first week. Just like leave me alone. Like, I think at that point also, I was probably starting to get, honestly, like a little bit tired of just constantly go, 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 and having this big disconnect between the person I really was and the things I really wanted to do versus the things that I felt like I had to do or should do or have to do. I don't know. Like, for me, it's a bit of a spoiler. I'll have a totally separate pod and video about this, but like, I hated the 4 years of business school. I hated every second of it. I thought about quitting like every day, like multiple times a day. And somehow I trudged through, still graduated amongst the top chunk of my graduating year. I got recruited into one of those jobs with a great salary and all that kind of stuff. But like, it was like drudgery for like the entire time. Like, it was suffering. Like, the happiest moments I had during that entire time was my unofficial philosophy minor. Like, in business school and commerce, like, we didn't have minors. I think we were one of the only degrees that didn't have minors. But like, I just went and like chose an unofficial one and like dove into all the philosophy topics, and that was kind of like the only stuff really. It sounds so sad, but like intellectually, that was the only stuff I really enjoyed. I mean, there were other parts of it. I lived with 3 other girls. And I loved my roommates. I had just such like an amazing time, and that stuff would also move on to inspire a lot of like found family themes in all my series. Like, found family, I feel like there's going to be a theme in all my series, just because that's just such a part of my life. Found and actual family. I'm just like a very, I don't know, I like love the people in my life, and they just inspire so much. So I think that will always be a bit of a theme. But anyways, I hated all of it. And I think after spending so many years pretending to be a person that I wasn't, I think that was kind of probably one of my first signs of just exhaustion from that. And so I just decided, like, I gave it up. I was just like, I don't want it. And I feel like that should have been like a first sign of like what would eventually lead me to where I am today. It was serendipity that I ended up making that decision, because on the first day of orientation week, which I would have missed if I would have stayed to be co-chair, I ended up meeting totally randomly my now husband, who I have been together with for 15 years now. And we've been married for 7 of those years. So, I mean, that's serendipity, and that will be a story in a pod in and of itself, because it's quite a wild story. My husband's Austrian, I'm Canadian. We met in Hong Kong, 2 separate continents, met on another one, dated long distance. So that's a bit of a story in and of itself. But that's kind of one of the decisions I made, where I made it purely emotionally. I did the unstrategic thing, and it ended up being one of the greatest decisions of my life, obviously. So that's one thing. But then I wanted to talk a little bit, of course, now move on to why I worked for free and how that really led to this, how that led into one of like the greatest things in my life. Remember, at this point, I'm in 3rd year of business school. And at this point, I was working a practical summer job that paid pretty well, considering how I didn't even have a degree yet. But it had nothing to do with the field I wanted to go into. So I knew I wanted to go into as creative of a field that I could get into with my business school degree, but that would still kind of make money. So, I mean, the career, flash forward now, if you look at the career I've chosen now to be an author, yes, there are plenty of authors that make a lot of money, but there are infinitely more that don't make any money. It's any creative career. It's also a business model change if you think about it. So for when you work corporate, you work a job for 14 years. I worked a job where they paid me based on my time. So they gave me a salary. There was like a set number of hours. I would do my job. They would pay me, and they would pay me even if I produced a garbage result. They would pay me the same if I produced fantastic results or garbage results. I mean, if I continued producing garbage results, I would eventually get fired. But if you think about it, like, I could have like a couple of off days, but like they would still pay me. A business model I've chosen now is, of course, it's royalty-based, right? It's like sales-based, but it is a business model where I need to have runway where I produce product, and then I'm gonna sell that product. And during that product production phase, nobody's paying me. I mean, at that point, it was not even in my consideration set to become an author or do anything really that creative. But I knew at least I wanted to go to marketing. I wanted to go client side. I knew I wanted to get into FMCGs. It's like the P&G, the Unilevers, Nestle, Kraft Heinz, like really like brand management academy or like marketing university is honestly how in like the business school environment I went to, like that's how we know it. It's like if you want to go and get fast track in the marketing field or have a fast track career in the marketing field, you go FMCG. I think things are different now because it's just such a mature industry, and there's also just like other industries, tech, for example, where there's a lot of people in my cohort or in my peer set that have moved on to have careers there. Very much the Silicon Valley environment. But when I was in school, it was like FMCG. Like if you make an FMCG, you've like made it from a marketing perspective coming out of business school. That's also like where like the recruitment was most stringent, but for this particular field where the salaries were absolutely the most competitive. Like if you could get recruited out of one of the best business schools straight into one of those jobs, in FMCG, if you want to go into marketing, of course, if you went to investment banking or if you went into consulting, you could make even more money. But if you want to do kind of this like quasi-creative, like if you want to go in a creative field like I did, that was the best way to do it. But there were only so many of those jobs. Like think about how many FMCG companies there are, like the big mega ones. There's like, I don't know, less than I can count on two hands. And then think about it. Each company maybe would only hire like 4 people per year. And think about how many people are in business school. Think about just my school had like 300 people. Which is a very small cohort, but that's still like 300 people. And we're talking about like, I don't know, maybe like between 15 and 20 positions for the entire country in these like top tier FMCG companies. So it was a bloodbath. Oh, I was trying but failing for 2 whole summers to get a summer internship, because getting a summer internship at one of those companies, how you make sure you're a shoo-in to get recruited for full-time employment once you graduate. Like that's just how that funnel worked. And I'd failed the first 2 summers and I was just like feeling like such a failure. I'm racking up this debt. It was just a feeling of like, if I don't get recruited, I'm gonna have to go for any other marketing job and start from the bottom, which meant I was going to probably start with a salary that was half of what the recruitment salary was gonna be. And it was going to have to be an uphill battle to climb myself to where the rest of my peer set was going to be, the ones who got recruited. So there was just this huge pressure. I mean, there may be other people who are like, oh, I disagree with that. Like, that's not what the experience was like. I don't know. Everyone's going to have a different experience, but like, that was my experience. Whether people agree or not, that was my experience. It was just this like huge pressure. And I remember I was doing recruitment interviews while I was in Hong Kong, which was so challenging also because I wasn't there in person. Everything had to be over phone. I had a terrible roommate while I was on exchange. And it's Hong Kong, so like I just couldn't even get like a private space to do interviews, do my interview calls, and it was just like a very challenging environment. And I failed again. Like that summer internship recruitment season, nothing landed for me, and so I was just facing the choice of like, oh my God, like I'm just gonna fly home now, go back to my data entry, moderately well paid, but it was gonna do nothing for me in terms of setting up my career for success. Like it had nothing to do with marketing or branding or creative or advertising or any of the things that I wanted to do. And here's the real kicker of why that was so hard. I even at that point was trying to get recruited to work like for barely anything or even nothing at an ad agency. So this is kind of infamous for a lot of creative jobs, is like a lot of people work for free to make it. I don't know. I'm not going to go into the ethics of that, whether it is what it is. And I've just always been the kind of person where I'm like, okay, well, I just got to do what I got to do to get to where I want. Even if it meant racking up more debt, like I don't have the luxury of like anyone bankrolling me. I do not have anything to fall back on, but I was just like, I got to do it if I want to get to where I want to get. So so I was searching for those types of jobs at ad agencies in Toronto. I'm originally from in Canada, and even that failed. So like, can you imagine what a hit to the ego that was? Like I was like, here I am, like elite, whatever, business school, fancy pants, and I'm offering my services to work for free, and like nobody wanted me. Nobody. I'm willing to work for free and you don't even want me? Like, what is this? And I think a lot of people can relate to this. Anyone who's trying to get into a creative field. One of my friends who's quite a bit younger than me is trying to do this at the moment. And like we were messaging about it, and I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, I get the dilemma. I get like the pain, the rejection, like just that feeling of like, I'm willing to work for free here and you don't even want me. So it was just such a hit to the ego, a really tough time for me, a really low time for me. And for whatever reason, like sometimes in life, like you just gotta let whoever is up there take the wheel. So I was like it was like a really sad time at this point. I'm like dating my then boyfriend, now husband, even though we knew at that point, like I knew there was an expiry date on that relationship, which I'll talk about in a whole separate video / pod, but I just felt like, okay, well then I'm gonna have to just like fly home. Like I need the money. So I'll like go back to this data entry job. But for whatever reason, I was like an alumni event one of the nights, and I'll never forget it. Some of like the alumni from my school who were living in Hong Kong, who'd like made it in Hong Kong, they took a bunch of us out one night, and like a bunch of us who were all on exchange at the same time at different schools in Hong Kong, or even in the same school, but we were all from the same school. And they took us out for a night, which was so nice of them. They absolutely didn't need to do that. Picked up the bill, like just gave us a really, really good time. And they were just so kind, like so helpful, like such great mentors. And I just, like I hope I get to a point in my life where I'm able to do that for other people. But that's like a whole separate topic, also meant for like a totally separate pod. But that, of course, like I stayed in contact with some of the people that evening, and one of them actually ended up emailing me back being like, hey, look, like I met someone at a networking event just like last week, and this person runs a boutique ad agency. Here's her contact, like get in contact, see where it leads. And I did, and I interviewed. He offered me a job, but the catch here was that she wasn't gonna be able to pay me. And I remember getting on a video call with my mom at this point. You remember, like, immigrant family, like my parents struggled to raise my sister and I in Canada as new immigrants. And I remember having this conversation with my mom, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like I've already racked up this huge debt. Like I also had to pay for like living expenses when I was in school because I was living away from home. Like I've like racked up this debt. There's like no promise of anything coming out of this. I might spend months working for free and it leads to nothing. And then I have even more debt, and I should have been making money in the summer. And I was so torn. Like I genuinely didn't know what to do. And my mom said actually like the wisest thing to me that I've never forgotten, and I've shared this advice with other people that I mentor. So I mentored a lot. I mentor a lot. I do that a lot now in my career. But one of my friends, I actually messaged her and told her this because she was sitting in kind of like a similar moment of like this. She's like on the precipice of this moment in her life of like making this decision, like what kind of person am I going to be? Like what direction am I going to choose? And my mom told me, Vivian, you pay to go to school at the moment. You pay a lot of money to go to school. What is it for? And I'm like, well, I need to get a piece of paper that says I'm good enough so people will hire me and give me a job and pay me. It's like, okay, I wish it weren't about that. I wish it were about learning, but okay, I get your point. So you're paying for the qualification. She's like, now you're going to do this job. This person who owns this ad agency isn't telling you to pay her. She's just telling you she's not going to pay you. So for school, you get a qualification, you have to pay to get it. And for this job, she's not going to pay you, but at least you don't need to pay. So she's like, if you think about it, it's kind of a better deal. She's like, you're going to get the qualification, and she's like, you're going to get the qualification, so you're going to tick the boxes, you're going to pad your resume. But most importantly, she's like, you're going to know coming out of this, you're going to have the experience. You're going to learn a lot. And that's yours, and no one can take that away from you, which I thought was it blew my mind when my mother told me this, because she just turned it on its head. I'm not gonna get paid. She's like, you don't get paid right now, and you have to pay to go to school to get what you're getting. You're not enjoying this. She's like, she knew, she's like, you hate like your program, like you don't like anything about it, you're still doing it. You're paying for your suffering. In this case, you're gonna do what you love. Like it was an ad agency. They had just landed this like fashion client. I've always wanted to do something in fashion. I love it. And she's like, you're gonna have fun. You're gonna work a lot, but you're gonna have fun. And at least you don't have to pay. Which I love, like this, like just, I don't know, it was just like a life-changing moment. You have these moments where it's just like this turning point, and that was like just the penny dropped at this moment. She told me that she like completely turned it on its head, and everything changed from that point on. So I took the job, and here's the craziest thing. I took the job, and then like maybe days later, hours later, I was, for whatever reason, I was like browsing my business school page, and like they announced, oh, like there's gonna be a new scholarship set up for people who want to do internships in Asia. Because the founder of the scholarship wants to encourage people in Canada to get work experience in Asia. And I was like, oh, that sounds like me. And I applied, and I got it. So this is like if you think about things lining up in life so that you can get where you need to go, this is it. So like I went to this event, I got the job, I had this conversation with my mom, I made my decision, I accepted the job, and then the scholarship came in. So it's like I made my decision. I was like, dear universe, I'm willing to work for free to make this happen. And then the universe responded with, oh, by the way, I found a way where you can still like fund your living expenses and still like find a way to make the ends meet and not rack up more debt to make this work. And so that was an incredible experience. So I did work for free. Somebody else was bankrolling me, if you think about it, to be able to do this. It wasn't my parents, but it was a scholarship that I got based on merit. I was a very, very good student. I had a lot of extracurriculars. I had a fantastic resume. So I got it based on merit, and it helped me fund the job I was doing for 3.5 months. I had truly an incredible experience. I like led a part of the campaign that this agency was doing for this fashion client, because I expressed to the managing director of this company, I said, I want to work on this fashion client. Like I was just so bold. I went in there being like, this is what I want. This is what I'm going to be able to do for you. I worked a ton. She didn't pay me, but you know what? I got the experience, and I had an amazing time. I learned so much, and I got the confidence. Also, like I led this project, and I was like, I've done it. Like I worked at an ad agency. I worked abroad at an ad agency where I don't know how anything works. It was my first time doing so many things, but I got the confidence. And here's the craziest part. So I finished that internship, and I also ended up being able to, I extended my stay in Hong Kong by another 4 months. Marcus, my now husband, then boyfriend, he stayed for another month after his exchange so we could like travel together. And it was so sweet, because at some point, like once we got back from our big China trip for 2.5 weeks together, I had to start work. I started work right away, and he was just like supportive boyfriend. Like I was working 1,000,000 hours, and he just like, I don't know, entertained himself during the day, and he made himself available in the evenings for us to spend time together. It was just like a way for us to like extend that dating period in our lives before we moved on to then date long distance for 5 years, before both moving to Germany to start our lives together, and then getting married 2 years after moving to Germany together. But here's the craziest part. So I finished that internship at the end of the summer. I flew back to Toronto to start my last year of business school. You remember, like, so I come back for my 4th year of business school, my final year, to jump right into recruitment season. And like, this was going to be it. Like, this was my last recruitment season before graduating. So the recruitment season for the full-time jobs when you graduate happen a full year before you graduate. They happen like that fall, the start of your final year of business school. And if you fail at that recruitment season, like you're done. Like that's it. You can still get another job, but you won't get one of those recruitment jobs into the management fast track programs. So the pressure was like really high. I felt like, okay, like now I've rolled the dice. This is what I've gotten. This is like my final shot. And I came back, and within like literally my first application, my first interview, Kraft was just really fast. It was still Kraft Foods at that point. Of course, I went through a merger, so now it's Kraft Heinz. At that point, they were one of the earliest ones to do their recruitment information session, to open up applications, interview, and within weeks, I'd landed the job, which was just nuts. Like, I spent years trying to get recruited into Kraft. It was absolutely my dream FMCG company. I mean, lots of FMCG companies are great, or I guess we call them CPG in Canada. Now, after moving to Europe, I call them FMCG. CPG is consumer packaged goods, by the way. FMCG is fast moving consumer goods, same thing. But I always loved Kraft. Like, they just had such a great company culture at the info sessions. Like, it was just, I don't know, it's like a vibe, it's a feeling. And I tried for years to get recruited, and then I got recruited in this job, and I absolutely attribute it to the experience I got. It wasn't even just about like having the ad agency experience on my resume, but it was the person I became. Like, I just came back and I went into that information session super confident. I went into the interview super confident. I had the knowledge, the know-how from all these things that I had learned in those 3.5 months while working a million hours a day. And it came across in my application, in how I handled myself, in how I handled the interview. And I am 100% sure I would have never gotten that job without this experience. If I would have come home and taken the safe option and come back, made the money, did that data entry job, I absolutely would not have gotten this job. So 100%, I am certain I only got this job because I made that decision when I did. So that was the first time. So that was at the age of 20. So that was at 20. And then what happened is of course, a year after getting recruited, I'd graduated, took the summer off, traveled to Europe like everybody does in North America after they graduate from uni. And then I started my dream job that I spent years getting recruited into, had a fantastic time, learned so much, got promoted, lived all my FMCG, CPG corporate dreams. And then at the age of 25 at that time, so my boyfriend, now husband, had been dating long distance for 5 years, Canada, Austria, which again is a story in and of itself. We both decided, like, it's kind of time to do something about it. We're not going to do this forever, and it's either like, it's like now or never, you know? Like, it's time to, like, at that point. So I'll explain this in a separate pod and video, but there was a real reason why we didn't move together right away, why we didn't try to make things work right away, why we continued doing long distance for so long. There were real reasons. There were real reasons why we picked Germany to move to, and I'll explain that in a separate episode. But at this point, it was like, okay, well, it's kind of time to, like, do something about it. And that's when I decided at that point that I wanted to do something different industry-wise anyways, and I quit my job without having another one lined up, bought a one-way ticket to Munich, Germany, packed up all my stuff into 3 boxes, 1 big luggage, 1 small luggage, and moved. I had a couple of interviews lined up, but I had no job lined up. But I did it to follow my heart, which was genuinely one of the best decisions I've ever made. I mean, moving to Germany, I think I will need to cover this in a separate video episode because this one's already getting so long. But moving to Germany, no network, no job, no language. I mean, there was a lot of risk associated with it. More than one person was like, do you speak German? Like, do you have a job lined up? Like, me, my worst fear was like, oh my God, I'm gonna come back broke, jobless, brokenhearted. I'm gonna like come back and like back to my parents' home. Like, just the whole thing was like, oh my God, this might be really stupid. This might fail horribly, but it was a totally emotional decision. Like, there was no real proof that I was going to succeed. You have to remember, I was like 3.5 years into my career at this point. Like, yeah, I had a big brand on my resume, like Kraft Heinz. I had a promotion behind me already. Like, I had stuff on my resume that was globally recognized, but like there was no promise I was going to succeed. I'd spent 5 years in a long distance relationship with my boyfriend, like there was no promise that once we moved together and once we weren't in long distance that it was going to succeed. I mean, loads of relationships fail because it's like, oh my God, I really loved being around you when I only saw you 4 times a year, but now that I see you every day, I can't say, like, this happens, right? So, I mean, for me, it was like, there's so much chance for failure, but it ended up being genuinely one of the best decisions I've ever made because I spent 10 years building up my career to the point that it is, right? When I quit a couple of months ago to launch my first book, which is finished, by the way, I mean, I finished as an exec at a global multinational company, very successful in my corporate career. I built that in 10 years, learned German, business fluent, I can present, negotiate, read stuff in German. I have a fantastic network here now. So I built this life from scratch since moving here, and it was a lot of hard work, but I mean, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Like the life I live here, the friends I've made here, the experiences I've lived, like the career I've built here, none of that ever would have happened if I wouldn't have taken that leap. So I did that. And then, of course, a few months ago, I walked away from like this exec career. You remember at the point I left, I will cover this again in another video, another episode. But when I made the decision, that week I made the decision to leave all this behind to pursue my author career, I was being chased by 3 headhunters who were trying to hire me into a VP job. So in my job at the time, like I was an exec, but VP would have been the next level. And I had headhunters being like, we want to move you to Singapore for a VP job. We want to offer you like the whole bells and whistles of like all the corporate dreams you would have ever wanted, like the next step, like VP, big car, big salary, like all that fancy stuff that 15-year-old Vivian only could dream of. This is what was on the table for me. And I turned all of it down to finally do this. Like I'd spent 7.5 months with this like world of aerostasis deluging into my mind and just like loving every second of it. Like writing this book despite the promise of like there's no promise anyone's gonna pay me for it. There's no promise anyone's gonna buy my book. There's no promise anyone's gonna read it. There's no promise of anything coming out of this. It's a completely emotional decision. Like not taking that co-chair position, like working for free that summer, like pursuing my relationship despite knowing that there was going to be an expiration date on it, like quitting my job and moving to Germany, like quitting my job again to pursue my dream of becoming an author and publishing this story that fell in my head that I can't stop thinking about, that just is something I just believe in. And it's not even about, for me, it's not even about, oh my God, I want to do this so bad. So every single time I thought about not doing this or giving up on aerostasis and column matter and giving up on all my characters, it was more like, I can't. I literally can't walk away. So I will cover that moment where I made my decision in a totally separate episode because it deserves an episode in and of itself, because that week leading up to that decision was like, it was happening, or like everything was like happening in real time. And it was just such an incredible moment in my life. But either way, that's how at 20, I worked for free to finally land that dream job. At 25, I quit that dream job, walked away from all of it to follow my heart, which was the best decision. And then at 35, I went and did it again, right? And all of these have been completely emotional decisions. There was never a single moment where it was ever promised that there would be any success or anything coming out of this. Like the chances of failure were really high. And I did it anyways. And at least I can't talk about the one I just made because I don't see any results yet. But for all of the other ones I've made in the past, they ended up being the greatest turning points in my life. And like they led to the most incredible results, not just in terms of like, oh, like the experience was great, but like actual measurable results. Like if I would not have done this, I would have not achieved like this stuff that looks super cool on my CV now and is literally the reason why headhunters are calling me. So that's really the story of how, as someone who spent her whole first chunk of her life always doing the practical, strategic thing, et cetera, like I don't regret that, because that's what set me up to be able to make these impractical, quasi-unstrategic decisions. But at the same time, it's also these on paper, seemingly unstrategic, impractical decisions that ended up actually creating the most incredible results and the most incredible moments in my life. So I wanted to share that story. I hope that was at least inspiring for some of you who maybe are also on the verge of making a critical decision in your life, deciding whether to take a bet on yourself. Just let me know. Leave a comment, send me an email, DM me. I'd love to hear your story and love to know if I was able to bring a little bit of inspiration into your life today. And if you're liking this journey, you want to hear more, hit the subscribe button, watch some of my other videos, or listen to some of my other episodes. Thanks a lot. Until next time.